All right, we've got our first speaker. So we've got Joe Mooring here, who is a frequent Hugo contributor. And Joe has been contributing to Hugo since 2021. He comes in second place for received likes on the Hugo form, which is with 4.2 thousand likes and counting. And he has spent over 65 days of reading time on the Hugo forum, more than any other contributor. So we've got a live chat with Joe to talk about how to contribute effectively to Hugo. So let's go over to Joe. Joe, how are you going?
I'm doing well. Good morning.
Thank you so much for joining us today. I think the Hugo community is really excited to hear from you.
It's my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So let's kick off. If you can maybe tell us a little bit about yourself and what got you into into the world of tech.
So I think there's a couple of pieces of that. Um, so I started my career at Accenture, was dealing with software development, documentation, testing in a number of verticals, distribution, logistics. Moved through a career really about supporting customers, about making customers more effective with the tools, whether it was software or hardware that whatever company I was working for at the time provided.
Mm.
This was really about accelerating usage, accelerating adoption, finding new things to do with tools, getting customers more engaged, making things sticky, right? That people didn't want to stop using. It became hard to stop using something. And my role in those organizations, varied from, executive staff down to, the guy who was sweeping the floor. I had a variety of roles depending on where I was. But I found in that time that there were really five key components of what was driving me. There's that question, what are those things that are most important to you? It took me years to figure that out. But it came down to what do I like to do? And it was learning, teaching, solving, creating, and ultimately delighting, right? I wanted to delight customers. Now you can get a psychologist in the room and sort of analyze that. And, I might have to lie down on the couch for a little bit for a couple of those. Um, but those are really the five things that kind of drive me. And if you look at my involvement in open source, whether it was imaging pipelines, dealing with Ghostscript for a number of years, my involvement in Drupal, which you asked me how I got involved with static sites. There was a level of, I reached a level of, how do I say this? I reached a level of frustration
Mm.
with one form of content management and was looking for something that would remove all those security notices in the email. And there was actually a agency that dealt with Drupal for a number of years, great people. And they put out a post about why they switched to static sites. And at the time, I think they had moved over to Jekyll.
Mm.
And these guys did some big work. I mean, really big work. They were, I think, in the Washington, D.C. area where I worked for about 20 years. So they were dealing with a variety of agencies, some that we know about and some that we don't know about. Um, anyway, I read this article by them, and that's kind of what moved me over. And I began with a small group of people experimenting with this and actually did some work, believe it or not, in construction information management using Hugo for um, actually managing some technical information, uh, technical images, which prior to that time, most of the things that I had seen done with Hugo were blogs,
Mm.
you know, and I don't think that a lot of organizations understood static site generators in general and all the things that they could be used for. I mean, it's sort of a long-winded answer to your question, but there's a part two of this that I think is also to understand, not just for me, but for a lot of the people who are involved in the community. When I was young, I used to play on the carpet in front of a sliding glass window facing east, sorry. The sun comes up in the morning and comes through it. And I would lie down on the floor as the youngest of four. And I had three shoe boxes. Legos. One had white bricks, one had red bricks, and the other box had stuff that I didn't really want. And I would lie down on that floor in the sun and put together things and then show them to my mom, who was, kind of work from home, stay at home mom. And, she said, "Oh, wow, that's great, dear." And she'd go back to what he was doing. And once I was done building it, I destroyed it. Right. It's like, okay, I'm done. What else can I do with this? And it was all about snapping things together, right? You have a vision of what you want to do. You look at the resources that you have at your disposal, and how do you go from A to B? Uh, and the Lego kits, like where you make a dump truck or a tow truck, or I never really had any interest in those. I got them at Christmas sometimes, but it's like you build a tow truck, and then what do you do with it? You take it apart. Now what do you do with it? The only thing you do with it is build another tow truck. That is boring. So I liked things where I could create, right? And then once I was done, I mean, you could call it sort of a form of attention deficit disorder, but once I was done with it, it's like, okay, what's next? I built it. I'm not interested anymore. And then one year, one Christmas, I got one of those gifts, a small Lego set. And keep in mind, this is a long time ago where, a lot of people just had the white bricks and the red bricks. That was it. This package had something that I really wasn't interested in building, but there was one thing in there that changed my life. It was a hinge. Lego put a hinge. It was the first hinge I had ever seen in a Lego set. You know what a kid can do with a hinge if they're motivated? Suddenly you've got a house that you normally build with. I mean, you're from Northern California. You got a lot of terracotta roofs. You use the red bricks for your terracotta roof. Well, now you could build a terracotta roof that would hinge open and a helicopter would fly out of it. And so whether it's been, imaging pipelines, document and information management, working with Drupal, working with Hugo, partly it's because of this brick aspect, being able to snap things together. And the second thing is when we're working in those communities, when a new feature comes out, that's like getting a new hinge, right? It's like, wow, what can I do with this? And Bjorn Erik's done a marvelous job of putting together some really powerful features. And some of them now we just take for granted because they've been there for so long. The taxonomy system. If you understand how to use it, and there's some gaps in the documentation there, it's one of the things on my list. But if you understand how to use that properly in the context of sort of, how are you going to structure your content? You can do amazing things with the taxonomy system. Something like image overlays. It sounds kind of dull. If you're dealing with an organization that is image centric, again, it's one of those features that can just totally change the conversation. And if you're an agency that is working with Hugo to provide solutions to state and local governments, nonprofits, corporations, education, each new feature that comes out gives you as an agency the opportunity to do something completely different that can drive revenue. So anyway, enough about me. What's next?
No, I love that. I think little did you know from your early days of Lego, you were destined to be in the Hugo community. Maybe
no way I would have known that.
Maybe there's something there we can analyze the next generation for how they use Lego and find our next Hugo contributors.
Well, it's interesting because the people that I've hired over the years, whether they've been in sales or technical support, product management, a lot of them have a very similar background and similar interests, where whether it was Legos or being out in the garage with dad slamming pieces of wood together. I think it's a way of thinking, and I think most people in our community have sort of come from that background. Is you envision something, you look at the raw materials, you look at the resources, and then you think, how do I go from A to B? And sometimes we need that Lego hinge, right? We need that new feature. So some things we can't do today, but tomorrow those things are possible. A great example of that is Dorn Eric's work on reworking Hugo's cache so that we can get up to not just a 50,000 page website, but a million page
Mm-hmm.
website without completely taxing our systems while we're building the site. And you hear something like that, an LRU cache, that's not very exciting, right? That doesn't sound like a new Lego hinge. But the production of new systems on a larger scale does depend on that hinge. And the work behind that to make that actually happen, that is not a trivial effort.
Mm.
I mean, that's going to be, tens of thousands of lines of code that are going to be changed to make that happen.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and it opens up so many possibilities because it feels like most other static site generators have hit some sort of wall in terms of build time, and then it switches. Suddenly, you have to render things on demand, which kind of goes against the whole idea of statically generating websites, pre-building them before they're actually needed. And so, if you can do that for a million page website, suddenly there's a whole new range of use cases and scale that can feasibly be completely like statically generated, which is incredible.
and I don't know how state and federal governments vary across the various countries where our contributors come from. But certainly here in the US, within the medical community and within state and local governments, there are opportunities for sites that have hundreds of thousands of
Big
pages,
time.
and part of that is document retention requirements,
Mm.
right? And I mean, we've still got organizations that very slowly are pulling boxes and microfiche out of storage to get all that stuff scanned in and online.
Mm.
And none of that, none of it is dynamic.
Yeah.
None of it. It is a perfect application for this. And if you look at version control,
Mm.
absolutely required. And if you look at both medical and state and local governments, they need to have fingerprints on everything that they do. I was talking to actually it was a guy in DC talking to him about how they might use a tool like Git, and he was asking about, well, how do you track down who did what?
Mm.
And I said, Git has this great subcommand called blame. And, oh yeah. And that was his reaction. He just started laughing. And his response was, that's perfect. How do we get started?
Mm.
So again, for whether on this call you are a member of an agency in the medical community or an agency, there are so many untouched opportunities for static site generators and Hugo in particular.
I agree. I completely agree. Joe, what initially brought you to Hugo? I think you said there was a blog post from an agency that converted, I think, from Drupal to Hugo. Was Did you look at any other static site generators, or was it love at first sight?
Yeah, so I remember doing searches, right? What are the top 10, static site generator? And, it was Jekyll, Hugo, Hexo, which, the Hexo branding and Hugo branding, it's a little sketchy.
Mm.
Both are using hexagons, both with the letter H. I don't know who came first, but if these weren't open source projects, the attorneys would be involved. Anyway, I looked at, probably a half dozen of them. It came down and tried them out, took them through their paces. It came down to Jekyll versus Hugo. Hugo had no dependencies.
Mm.
Hugo was so much faster.
Hmm.
The Jekyll draw was the available of quality themes and a larger community.
Yep.
So, and I actually looked at Hugo, I think it was back in 2019, maybe 2018. And at that time, Hugo was pretty popular and the community was pretty active, not as active, right? Not as active as Jekyll, but I saw a lot more future in Hugo. And that future is actually what this conversation is about, and that's, contributing to make sure that that future stays in place, right? We're protecting our future by contributing.
So tell us about your role in contributing to Hugo. Like where are you spending most of your time, and how do you see yourself adding value to the community?
So I got sucked into this. Um, I needed to learn, and I needed to learn rapidly. And we all learn in different ways, right? Visual, reading, whatever. Um, I went back to those 5 things that motivate me: solving, helping,
Mm,
So I looked at, Giraffe Academy's videos, uh, which at this point are out of date, but still
mm,
very useful for a newcomer. And I think there was something like 19 episodes of that. So I actually did a spreadsheet, made a list of those 19, and I went through each one and checked off the box. And then when I was done, took a break, and then came back and did it again.
mm,
After the second run through, I got it. But I wanted to learn more, and searching for questions on the forum. Each forum host or somebody had a problem became a challenge, almost like homework or a quiz if you were in school. And instead of guessing at an answer or pointing people at documentation, do what I've done in testing for a lot. What do? You recreate the problem. You get an
mm,
isolated test case. And each one of those that you go through to recreate what the user has done, and then you tear it apart when you're done and move on to something else. What does it sound like to you? It sounds like Legos, me sitting on the floor, building houses. And then when I'm done, it's like, yes, I've made someone happy, including me. Now I'm going to tear it down and work on the next one.
mm,
So it was really about support, right? And me wanting to learn, and then also getting pleasure out of seeing people being helped, right? And knowing that I was the one to do that. Like that gives me joy. But then once you're involved in support, you start seeing opportunities in documentation, right? So start contributing there. That's exactly what I did. And then start looking at, well, what else is there here? Because, this documentation seems a little strange. Something's not right here. Let's look on the software side. Right. So then you start going through the issue queue, right? Are there any known issues about this, something that's inconsistent or something that you don't think is behaving right? And then, you end up looking at things on the issue queue. Are these actually repeatable? These people who are reporting bugs, are these bugs or are these learning opportunities?
mm,
So then my involvement went there. And then ultimately getting a little bit familiar with Go and actually start contributing on the software side. And there's I've seen it posted a few times. Somebody referred to me as a senior developer. And I didn't know quite how to respond to that. If you took, the smartest Go people in the world on a good day, I know 3% of what they know. That'd be on a really good day. I know that. So although I enjoy tracking problems down and contributing, my qualifications, my skill level is nowhere near where Bjorn, Eric, or even some of the other contributors are, even though they're infrequent. So anyway, I got sucked into this, and it was a natural progression, right? Supporting, documenting, more support, but also getting closer to software development, and then contributing bug fixes and the occasional new feature.
mm. So I think if we could clone 100 Joes, like then we would have 100 times the contributions, and the project's already thriving. But how do we get more people into that mindset, and how can the community contribute to Hugo?
Yeah, so I was thinking last night about ratios, and I have no idea what the data is, so I'm going to make up numbers, right? What was that line from Mark Twain? Lies, damn lies, and statistics, right? So on a small project, and I consider Hugo to be mid-size for an open source project, but on a small project, I think for every 20 people who take something away from the project, you've got one contributor. I think, but just, again, these numbers could be off, but I think for a mid-sized project, it might be for every 200 people that take something away from the project, you have one contributor. And then for something massive, a massive open source program, like, right, Go development, right? Development of the Go language. That number might be for every 10,000 people who take something away from it, one contributes. So, our goal for keeping a community thriving and protecting our future, whether we're individual users or an agency, or an actual corporation who's using, we want to protect our future. So the question first, before how to contribute, which I kind of just covered, is why, right? I think if people understand the value of contributing, we get more people doing it. And the topic about contributing, and by the way, this is the same thing as volunteering. I was at a fundraiser, and there was a young man who had just come back from a 3-year stint in the Peace Corps. And I think he was serving somewhere in South America. And he addressed this question while everybody's eating their rubber chicken dinner. And he said it comes down to being selfish. And that got everybody's attention. It's like you got this guy from the Peace Corps talking to you about being selfish, right? We think selfish is a bad thing. Oh, no, you can't be selfish. Selfish is bad. And then he went on and he said, it's not selfish from the standpoint of greed. It's selfish from the standpoint of enlightened self-interest. And enlightened self-interest is this concept of, if I give, I'm going to get more back. It's economics. So it does come down to being selfish. It does come down to being greed. Why contribute? And again, I've used this example a few times, but agencies, right? If you are a development agency and you are using this tool, and it might be in your bag of tricks with other tools, you need to make sure that the Hugo community is vibrant, that its developers are supported. And I don't just mean sponsoring them, but supported to some extent, even emotionally, which sounds strange. But my skin is only so thick. And you get enough hits on issue queues or on the forums that, something feature is terrible and I'm irritated by this, and words like that, or you're not supporting the community, you're not supporting the developers, because we're people too. And saying the wrong things is a demotivator. So this idea of supporting the community isn't just, sort of answering questions or contributing code or contributing to the documentation. It's about supporting each other, growing a vibrant community, again, to protect our future so that it continues to be a very healthy and sort of self-reliant project. And if you look at the reasons that open source projects fail, it's a lot like the reasons that companies fail, right? One of them is actually competition, right? You get a new and better mousetrap out there, and Hugo's been on the winning end of those competitions. Not all of them in all areas, right? I mean, we've got warts just like everybody else, but competition can be a part of it. As a corporation, you change policies, right? You increase your prices by 15% overnight. You irritate your customers. What are they going to do? They're going to go elsewhere, right? You have poor customer support, right? Where you end up, with a technical problem talking to somebody whose last job, and I'm not putting this down, but their last job was handling insurance claims, right? Because, I'm used to dealing with customers, which is very true. And some of those people are great, but you also want to know that you're talking to the right person. So, just like a corporation can make bad decisions that kill their future, open source projects do the same thing. I mean, without naming names, I can think of a couple right off my head that had a great start and then made some killer moves that dropped off half of their user base. It was like falling off a cliff almost overnight. So, this question of why contribute, it's about enlightened self-interest, protecting the future, But there's another aspect of it, right? And that's the joy that it can bring.
Mm.
Um, I like seeing a smile on people's faces. I like knowing that I've been able to help somebody else do their job, make their Lego house, whatever it is. I find that to be intensely rewarding. I find it to be fun. Even documentation, which can be, it can be actually a hellish exercise sometimes, depending on what you're trying to revamp. I went through an exercise of revamping Hugo's documentation for the menu system. Hell, that's another one of those features that I think gets doesn't get enough credit. Uh, the menu system is great, but there's three different ways to define menu entries. And then if you look at Hugo's multilingual feature, I think for each of those three methods to define menu entries, there's two, in some cases, there's three methods to handle the localization of them. And so kind of revamping the documentation to take all of that into account, it's a lot of work, a lot of work. I mean, it took me days to do that. But then at the end of it, I looked at it and went, you know what? That's not bad. I'm going to give myself on the pat on the back. But guess what else I noticed after doing that? Questions about menu system in our forum dropped off. Right? You put the right thing, and suddenly, this again, enlightened self-interest. I make an investment here, and work on the other side goes away. A company I work for, we actually had installers, people who went out and installed stuff on site, and then when they'd come back, they would inevitably the customer would have problems afterwards. Something went wrong with the installation, and we looked at those very carefully, and we found a pattern. And we put together a checklist for the installers to take on site, which took a while to figure out what all that was. And after we did that, guess what? We didn't have any problems anymore. There were no more problems in the field. So this idea of making an investment in one aspect to get a return on another, and that's also an example of enlightened self-interest. So anyway, I can't sort of emphasize it enough. You might look at contributing as just somebody sucking your time or somebody sucking your money away. It's not about that. Yes, it does take an investment, but in almost all cases, the return is going to far exceed what you put into it.
Amazing. Let's end on that very powerful message. Joe, I want to thank you on behalf of the whole Hugo community. I think everyone here has seen your face and has seen everything you've done for the Hugo community. And I think Hugo's future is extremely bright. And a lot of that is your time and energy that you've put into supporting everything around the community and just making Hugo a more easier to understand and just a more vibrant community to be a part of. So thank you so much for all your work.
Thank you for your kind words, and thank you for having me.